The radio crackled with static before the voice cut through, desperate and strained. Any station, this is Wolfpack 6. We are danger close, taking heavy fire from fortified positions. Request immediate close air support. Grid 41 SMD 847 293. How copy? Captain Raven Ghost, Delacroix adjusted her helmet and scanned the mountainous terrain below through the canopy of her. Thunderbolt II. The twin engines hummed their familiar song as she banked left, searching for the source of the distress call. Her aircraft, weathered and scarred from countless missions, bore the distinctive shark teeth painted across its nose, a tribute to the flying tigers her grandfather had flown with in Burma. Wolfpack 6, this is Hog 17. I copy your transmission. What's your situation? Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had done this dance before, though at 28, she was younger than most of her squadron peers believed possible. The response came back fragmented, punctuated by the sharp crack of rifle fire. Hog 17, we have 12 packs pinned down in a compound. Enemy positions are dug in approximately 800 meters northeast of our location. We've been taking fire for the past 40 minutes. Low on ammo. Ghost felt her jaw tighten. 800 meters. The margin for error at that distance was razor-thin, especially with friendlies in the mix. She'd seen what happened when close air support went wrong. The aftermath haunted her dreams more than enemy fire ever could. Copy that, Wolfpack. I'm going to need eyes on target. Can you mark your position? Negative, Hog. We're combat ineffective for marking procedures. Too much incoming. Below, the Hindu Kush mountains stretched endlessly, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. Ghost had been flying these valleys for 18 months. Every ridge and valley burned into her memory like a map of scars. The A-10 responded to her touch like a living thing, its massive GAU-8 cannon mounted in the nose capable of delivering devastating precision, if she could find the target. Wolfpack 6, describe your target area. What am I looking for? Stone compound, 2 stories, green metal roof. Big antenna on the northeast corner. They've got at least 2 heavy machine gun positions and what looks like an RPG team. Ghost's eyes swept the landscape below. There, a flash of muzzle fire from a rocky outcrop. She rolled the aircraft slightly, bringing the target area into better view through her targeting pod. The compound materialized on her screen, exactly as described, muzzle flashes winking from multiple positions like deadly fireflies. The question wasn't whether she could hit the target. The question was whether she could hit it without killing the very people she was trying to save. At 800 meters, with no laser designation and friendlies in close proximity, most pilots would call it impossible. Most pilots weren't Ghost Delacroix. Wolfpack 6, stand by. I'm going to paint this target for you. She pushed the throttles forward and began her approach run, the A-10's nose dropping toward the valley floor. The mountains rose around her like the walls of a cathedral, and somewhere in that stone compound, 12 Americans were counting on her to thread an impossible needle. The radio fell silent except for the sound of her own breathing, and the steady thrum of twin turbofans carrying her toward a shot that would define everything. Hog 17, be advised. Our air controller is down. No laser designation available. The voice belonged to Master Sergeant Jake Torres, a 20-year veteran who had seen enough combat to know when a mission was sliding sideways. His team was spread across the compound's courtyard, using whatever cover they could find as automatic weapons fire-chewed chunks from the ancient stone walls. Ghost felt her stomach drop. No laser meant no precision guidance for her Maverick missiles. It meant flying by sight, experience, and instinct in terrain that offered no margin for error. She pulled up her tactical display, studying the grid coordinates and comparing them to the landscape below. Copy, Wolfpack. What's your exact position within the compound? Southwest corner, single-story structure. We've got wounded who can't move. Through her targeting pod, Ghost could see the compound clearly now. The enemy positions were well chosen, elevated, with overlapping fields of fire that had the SEALs trapped. The green metal roof Tors had described showed multiple bullet holes, testament to the intensity of the firefight below. She keyed her radio to contact Bagram Air Base. Linebacker, this is Hog 17. Request permission for danger close mission. Friendly forces within 800 meters. The response came back quickly, too quickly. Hog 17, negative. Mission parameters exceed safety margins. RTB for rearm and await follow-on assets. Ghost felt heat rise in her chest. Return to base. Wait for other aircraft. By then, Tors and his team would be dead or captured. Another failed mission chalked up to excessive caution and rules of engagement written by people who had never heard rounds crack overhead. Linebacker, Wolfpack 6 is combat ineffective and taking casualties. Request you reconsider. Hog 17, your request is denied. You are not cleared hot. Repeat, you are not cleared hot. Ghost clicked off the radio and stared at the compound below. The muzzle flashes had increased in intensity. The enemy was massing for a final assault. In her headset, she could hear Tors calling for his medic, his voice strained with the knowledge that his men were running out of time. She thought about her father, Colonel Marcus Delacroix, who had been shot down over Vietnam and spent 3 years in a POW camp because his wingman had followed orders instead of instinct. She thought about the Medal of Honor citation that hung in her childhood bedroom, awarded posthumously to her grandfather after he had crashed his P-40 into a Japanese destroyer rather than let it reach American transport ships. The Delacroix family had never been known for following orders when Americans were dying. Ghost rolled the A-10 into a steep bank and began her attack run. The GAU-8 cannon beneath her feet contained 1,174 rounds of 30-depleted uranium ammunition, each one capable of punching through tank armor. At the right angle, with the right precision, those rounds could eliminate the enemy positions without endangering the trapped SEALs. The right angle meant flying straight into the enemy's guns, low and slow, giving them every opportunity to shoot her down. Wolfpack 6, this is Hog 17. Keep your heads down, guns inbound. The A-10 dropped toward the valley floor like a falling anvil, its ungainly silhouette cutting through the thin mountain air. Ghost felt the familiar compression in her chest as she pushed the aircraft beyond its comfort zone, trading altitude for speed and positioning. The targeting reticle on her heads-up display danced across the compound as she fought to line up the shot. 800 meters had seemed like a reasonable safety margin when the mission planners drew their circles on maps back at headquarters. Now, with the stone walls of the compound filling her windscreen and the bright flashes of enemy muzzle fire growing larger by the second, 800 meters felt like 8 inches. Contact left, Tor's voice crackled through the radio, strained with desperation. They're moving to flank us. Ghost could see them now, dark figures rushing between buildings, trying to get angle shots on the trapped SEALs. Her finger hovered over the trigger, waiting for the perfect moment when geometry and ballistics would align to deliver precision death to her enemies while sparing her countrymen. The enemy had spotted her approach. Tracer rounds began reaching up from multiple positions, green and orange streams of light that looked deceptively beautiful until you realized each one represented someone trying to kill you. The A-10 shuddered as several rounds found their mark, but the aircraft had been designed to absorb punishment and keep flying. Hog 17, you're taking fire, Tors called out unnecessarily. Ghost didn't respond. She was too busy calculating angles, wind drift, and the precise moment when she would need to squeeze the trigger to put 30mm rounds exactly where they needed to go. The heads-up display showed her airspeed dropping, 110 knots, 105, 100. Any slower and she'd stall, becoming an easy target for the RPG team she could see setting up on the compound's roof. The reticle settled over the first machine gun position. Ghost held her breath and squeezed. The GAU-8 cannon erupted with a sound like the world's largest chainsaw cutting through steel. The aircraft shuddered as it spat out 70 rounds per second, each muzzle flash lighting up the cockpit like lightning. Depleted uranium projectiles streaked toward the target at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, covering the distance in less than a heartbeat. The first machine gun position simply ceased to exist. Ghost pulled hard right, her vision graying at the edges as G-forces pressed her into her seat. The A-10 groaned in protest but responded, its massive wings biting into the thin air as she set up for the second run. Below, she could see the effect of her first pass, a smoking crater where the enemy position had been, scattered debris, and figures running for cover. Good hits, Torres was shouting into his radio. Say again, Hog 17. But Ghost was already lining up the second target, the RPG team on the roof who were frantically trying to track her movement. Time compressed into a tunnel of pure focus. Airspeed, altitude, angle of attack, wind compensation. Every variable had to be perfect. The second burst was shorter, more precise. 25 rounds that turned the rooftop position into rubble and silence. Master Sergeant Torres pressed himself against the compound wall as chunks of stone and metal rained down from above. The sudden silence was almost more unsettling than the sustained firefight had been. His ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear his own thoughts, let alone his team's radio calls. "Sound off," he barked, his voice echoing strangely in the aftermath of the A-10's gun runs. One by one, his men called in their status. 12 souls accounted for, 3 wounded but mobile, ammunition nearly exhausted. From his position, Torres could see Ghost's aircraft climbing back to altitude, already setting up for another pass. The pilot had just performed what would have been considered impossible by any reasonable standard: surgical precision with a weapon system designed for mass destruction, danger close to friendly forces in mountainous terrain without laser guidance. "Who the hell is that pilot?" asked Corporal Martinez, the team's youngest member, as he watched the A-10 bank into another attack run. Torres had been wondering the same thing. In 20 years of special operations, he had worked with dozens of close air support pilots. Most were competent professionals who followed procedures and delivered ordnance on target when conditions were favorable. A few were cowboys who took unnecessary risks and endangered friendly forces. This pilot was something else entirely, a surgeon wielding a sledgehammer with the precision of a scalpel. "Hog 17, this is Wolfpack 6. Outstanding work up there. What's your fuel status?" Ghost's voice came back steady and professional, showing no trace of the stress that should have been crushing her after threading such an impossible needle. "Wolfpack, I've got 40 minutes of playtime remaining. Are you seeing any movement from the remaining positions?" Torres scanned the compound through his rifle scope. The enemy fire had stopped completely after Ghost's second pass, but that didn't mean they were out of the fight. In his experience, that kind of silence usually meant the enemy was either dead, gone, or planning something worse. "Negative movement at this time. We're going to try to advance and clear the remaining structures." "Copy. I'll maintain overwatch. Any movement in your area and I'll let you know." As Torres prepared to move his team forward, he found himself studying the A-10 circling overhead. The aircraft looked like it had been through hell, scorch marks along the fuselage where enemy rounds had found their mark, one of the vertical stabilizers showing obvious battle damage. But it stayed on station, maintaining a protective circle above his men like a mechanical guardian angel. 20 minutes later, the compound was secure. Torres' team had found the bodies of 7 enemy fighters, their positions destroyed with surgical precision that left the surrounding buildings largely intact. The kind of accuracy that textbooks said was impossible at that range, under those conditions, with that weapon system. As his team prepared for extraction, Torres keyed his radio one final time. Hog 17, this is Wolfpack 6. I don't know who you are up there, but you just saved 12 American lives with what I can only describe as the most professional display of airmanship I've ever witnessed. Ghost's response was characteristically modest. Just doing my job, Wolfpack. Glad everyone made it home. But Torres knew better. What he had just witnessed wasn't just professional competence. It was something approaching artistry, the kind of flying that happened when skill, experience, and raw courage intersected at exactly the right moment. He made a mental note to find out who was behind the call sign Hog 17. Whoever she was, she deserved recognition. Back at Bagram Air Base, the debriefing room felt like a courtroom. Ghost sat at the metal table, still wearing her flight suit, facing a panel of officers who looked like they had been summoned from their comfortable desk jobs to deal with an unwelcome complication. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Vance, the squadron operations officer, tapped his pen against a yellow legal pad with the measured rhythm of a man choosing his words carefully. Captain Delacroix, he began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional displeasure, you were explicitly denied permission for that attack run. Your orders were to return to base and await follow-on assets. Ghost met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir, I understood the transmission. Yet you chose to engage anyway, putting friendly forces at risk with an unauthorized attack in violation of established engagement parameters. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Ghost could feel the weight of judgment from the assembled officers, the kind of men who had built careers on following procedures and avoiding the messy complications that came with independent thinking. Major Patricia Henley, the intelligence officer, leaned forward slightly. Captain, help me understand your decision-making process. What made you believe you could successfully prosecute that target without endangering friendly forces? Ma'am, I had positive identification of the target, clear separation between enemy positions and friendly forces based on visual confirmation and radio communication, and optimal weather conditions for precision engagement. Lieutenant Colonel Vance's pen stopped tapping. Captain, the safety parameters exist for a reason. 800 meters is considered danger close because the margin for error. Sir, with respect, I've been flying close air support missions in this theater for 18 months. I know these valleys, I know my aircraft's capabilities, and I know the difference between acceptable risk and reckless endangerment. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ghost could see the subtle shifts in body language that indicated she had just crossed a line. The straightened shoulders, the exchanged glances, the careful positioning of hands on the table. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the wing deputy commander, spoke for the first time. Captain Delacroix, your service record shows multiple commendations for close air support missions. However, this incident represents a fundamental breach of operational discipline that cannot be overlooked. Yes, ma'am. Master Sergeant Torres has submitted an after-action report praising your performance and recommending you for recognition. He specifically states that your actions prevented what would have been a catastrophic loss of American lives. Ghost felt a small flicker of hope. Torres' recommendation might not save her career, but it at least provided some balance to the proceedings. Colonel Mitchell continued. However, praise from ground forces does not excuse violation of direct orders. The question before us is whether your unauthorized engagement represents the kind of initiative we want to encourage or the kind of indiscipline that gets people killed. Ma'am, 12 Americans are going home to their families tonight because I made that shot. And if you had missed, if your rounds had landed 50 meters short, we would be explaining to 12 families why their sons and fathers died from friendly fire. Ghost nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am, that's the burden of the decision I made. The officers exchanged glances, and Ghost could read the subtext in their expressions. She had given them what they needed, an acknowledgement of the risk, but not an apology for taking it. The night sky over Bagram was clear, stars visible despite the ambient light from the sprawling base. Ghost sat alone on the flight line, her back against the landing gear of her A-10, staring up at the constellation patterns her grandfather had taught her to identify during childhood camping trips in the Colorado mountains. The aircraft bore fresh battle scars from the day's mission, bullet holes patched with speed tape, a hydraulic line that had been repaired and tested, scorch marks where tracer rounds had found their target. The maintenance crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, had assured her the aircraft was flight-ready, but Ghost could see the accumulation of damage that 18 months of combat operations had inflicted on her mount. Rough day. She turned to see Captain Marcus "Tank" Thompson approaching, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the squadron-ready room. Tank was one of the few pilots in the squadron who had never made her feel like she had to prove herself. He judged aviators by their performance in the cockpit, not by their gender or their age. "Could have been worse," Ghost replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The liquid was bitter and overstrong, the way military coffee had been since time immemorial. Tank settled down beside her, his own back against the landing gear strut. "Word is you made an 800-meter danger close shot without laser designation. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." Jury's still out on which one. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching aircraft taxi past on their way to and from night missions. The base never truly slept. There was always another sortie to fly, another target to strike, another group of Americans in need of close air support somewhere in the vast expanse of Afghanistan. "You know," Tank said eventually, "when I first heard they were assigning a 26-year-old female pilot to our squadron, I figured it was some kind of diversity initiative. Political correctness gone military." Ghost felt her jaw tighten slightly, though she tried not to show it. She had heard variations of this conversation more times than she could count. "But after watching you fly for the past year and a half, I've got to say, you're one of the best stick-and-rudder pilots I've ever seen. That shot today under those conditions with friendlies in the mix, that was art." "Thanks, Tank. That means something coming from you." The old heads in the squadron, they're starting to come around. Word travels fast in a community this small, and what you did today is going to be talked about for a long time. Ghost took another sip of coffee and considered that statement. She had never flown for recognition or to prove a point about gender integration in combat aviation. She flew because she loved it, because she was good at it, and because Americans on the ground depended on her to be there when they needed her. But she was also realistic enough to know that her performance was being evaluated through a different lens than her male counterparts. Every mission was a test, every decision scrutinized for signs of either excessive caution or reckless aggression. "What do you think will happen with the disciplinary review?" she asked. Tank shrugged. "Hard to say. On one hand, you violated direct orders and engaged without authorization. On the other hand, you saved 12 lives with a shot most pilots wouldn't have attempted. And I think the Air Force has invested too much time and money training you to throw you away over following your instincts when Americans were dying." 3 days later, Ghost found herself back in the briefing room, this time facing a different panel of officers. Colonel Mitchell was still present, but she had been joined by Brigadier General Patricia Hayes, the Theater Air Component Commander, whose presence elevated the proceedings considerably. General Hayes was a legend in the close air support community, a former A-10 pilot herself who had flown missions over Iraq during the first Gulf War and had been one of the first female officers to command a fighter squadron. Her presence suggested that Ghost's case had attracted attention at levels well above the local chain of command. "Captain Delacroix," General Hayes began, "I've reviewed the after-action reports from your recent engagement, including detailed statements from Master Sergeant Torres and his team members. I've also spoken with several senior pilots who have flown with you over the past 18 months. Ghost felt her pulse quicken, though she maintained her military bearing. Yes, ma'am. The consensus is that you are an exceptionally skilled pilot with sound tactical judgment and an instinctive understanding of close air support operations. Your performance record speaks to your professionalism and competence. Thank you, ma'am. However, the general continued, military discipline exists for reasons that transcend individual competence. When pilots begin making independent decisions about when to engage targets, regardless of their motivations, we risk undermining the entire command and control structure that keeps our operations coordinated and effective. Ghost nodded. I understand, ma'am. That said, the unique circumstances of your engagement, friendly forces in immediate danger, no available alternatives, and your demonstrated precision under extreme pressure, suggest that your actions, while technically insubordinate, were consistent with the highest traditions of military aviation. General Hayes paused, studying Ghost's face for any reaction. Captain, I'm offering you a choice. You can accept a letter of reprimand in your personnel file and continue flying missions as assigned, or you can request transfer to a non-combat role where your decision-making will not put you in conflict with operational constraints. The room fell silent. Ghost could hear the distant sound of jet engines spinning up on the flight line, pilots preparing for another night of missions over hostile territory. Somewhere out there, American ground forces were depending on close air support to keep them alive through the darkness. Ma'am, I request to continue flying combat missions. I thought you might say that. General Hayes smiled slightly. Captain, you have the instincts and skills to be an outstanding combat pilot, but you also have a tendency to trust your own judgment over established procedures. In most cases, that's a valuable trait. In some cases, it could get people killed. Yes, ma'am. Your letter of reprimand will note that you violated direct orders, but also that you demonstrated exceptional airmanship under combat conditions. It's a contradiction that reflects the complexity of combat operations and the sometimes impossible choices that pilots must make. Ghost felt a weight lift from her shoulders. A letter of reprimand would limit her promotion opportunities, but it wouldn't end her flying career. She would still be able to provide close air support to American ground forces, still be able to make the kinds of shots that saved lives when the situation demanded it. Thank you, ma'am. General Hayes stood, and the rest of the panel followed suit. Captain, don't let this incident make you second-guess your instincts. The ability to make split-second decisions under pressure is what separates good pilots from great ones. Just remember that with that ability comes responsibility, not just to the mission, but to the broader military structure that makes our operations possible. Word of Ghost's 800-meter shot spread through the military aviation community like wildfire, carried by the informal networks that connected pilots across services and theaters. Within weeks, her call sign had become synonymous with precision close air support, the kind of legendary performance that got discussed in ready rooms from Bagram to Baghdad. The story grew in the telling, as military stories always did. Some versions had her making the shot at night, in a thunderstorm, with one engine out. Others claimed she had been inverted during the gun run, or that she had used the aircraft's cannon to spell out messages in the sand. Ghost found the embellishments amusing but troubling. She preferred that her reputation be built on facts rather than mythology. Master Sergeant Torres, meanwhile, had been telling his version of events to anyone who would listen. His account was more accurate but no less compelling. A young female pilot who had defied orders to save his team, threading an impossible needle with the kind of precision that combat veterans respected above all else. She didn't just make the shot, Torres would say over beers at the NCO club. She made it look easy, like she was born to fly that airplane. The respect from the ground forces was particularly meaningful to Ghost. SEALs, Rangers, and Special Forces operators were notoriously skeptical of pilots who had never experienced ground combat, but Tor's endorsement carried weight in those communities. His recommendation for her to receive a Distinguished Flying Cross had been endorsed by his chain of command and was working its way through the awards process. But not everyone in the aviation community was impressed by Ghost's performance. A vocal minority of senior officers viewed her actions as dangerous precedent-setting, the kind of cowboy behavior that led to friendly fire incidents and mission failures. Lieutenant Colonel Vance had made his position clear during a squadron commander's meeting the previous week. If we start allowing pilots to ignore direct orders whenever they think they know better, we'll have chaos in the air. Discipline and adherence to established procedures are what keep our operations safe and effective. His concerns weren't entirely without merit. Military aviation required split-second coordination between multiple aircraft, ground controllers, and command elements. When pilots began making independent decisions about target engagement, the carefully orchestrated ballet of modern air operations could quickly dissolve into dangerous confusion. But Ghost supporters argued that her actions represented exactly the kind of tactical flexibility that combat operations demanded. War wasn't a textbook exercise. It was a fluid, dynamic environment where rigid adherence to procedures could cost lives just as easily as reckless improvisation. The debate reflected broader tensions within the military aviation community about the role of individual initiative versus institutional discipline. Both had their place, but finding the right balance required the kind of judgment that couldn't be taught in flight school or captured in operational manuals. For Ghost, the attention was both gratifying and uncomfortable. She had never sought the spotlight, preferring to let her performance speak for itself. But she also understood that her actions had become part of a larger conversation about what it meant to be a combat pilot in the 21st century. The mountains of Afghanistan offered no easy answers, only the endless cycle of missions that defined her daily existence. 6 months later, Ghost was leading a four-ship formation of A-10s on a close air support mission in Helmand Province when the radio crackled with another desperate call for help. This time, the voice belonged to Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a platoon leader whose unit had been ambushed during a routine patrol near Sangin. Any station, this is Cobra 6. We have mass casualty situation, troops in contact. Request immediate medical evacuation and close air support. Grid 41R Mr. 234 567. Ghost checked her tactical display and calculated the distance to the target area. 12 minutes at current airspeed. She keyed her radio to respond, but before she could transmit, another voice cut through the frequency. Cobra 6, this is Reaper 2-1. We have your position and are en route with Hellfire missiles and 30 Mike. ETA 8 minutes. Ghost recognized the call sign. Reaper 2-1 belonged to Captain Brad Morrison, one of the newer pilots in the squadron. Morrison was competent but inexperienced, the kind of pilot who followed procedures to the letter and rarely took tactical risks. Reaper 2-1, this is Hog 17. I'm closer to the target area and have more appropriate ordnance for danger-close operations. Recommend I take the lead on this engagement. The radio fell silent for several seconds before Morrison responded. Hog 17, I've got the mission. Continue on your assigned heading. Ghost felt her jaw tighten. Morrison was technically within his rights to claim the mission. His aircraft had been dispatched in response to the emergency call. An Air Force doctrine generally assigned missions based on aircraft availability and positioning rather than pilot experience. But Ghost knew these valleys better than any pilot in the squadron. She had flown close air support missions in this exact area dozens of times, knew the terrain features that could complicate target identification, and understood the tactical considerations that made Helmand Province one of the most challenging environments for precision airstrikes. More importantly, she had heard the strain in Lieutenant Kim's voice, the kind of desperate urgency that indicated her unit was in immediate danger of being overrun. Cobra 6, this is Hog 17. What's your situation on the ground? Kim's response came back fragmented by static and the sound of automatic weapons fire. Hog 17, we've got approximately 30 enemy fighters in a tree line 400 meters to our northeast. They've got us pinned down in a canal with no cover. 3 KIA, 5 WEA, and we're running low on ammunition. 400 meters. Even closer than her famous shot 6 months earlier, but with different tactical complications. A tree line meant concealed positions and limited visibility for target identification. Wounded soldiers meant that any missed shots could be catastrophic. Cobra 6, can you mark your position? Negative, Hog 17. We're taking too much fire to deploy marking devices. Ghost could see the target area now. A network of irrigation canals and cultivated fields broken by lines of trees that provided perfect cover for insurgent positions. She could also see muzzle flashes from multiple locations along the tree line, confirming Kim's assessment of enemy strength. Morrison's voice came back over the radio, professional but tight with stress. Hog 17, I have the target area in sight. Recommend you maintain overwatch while I engage. Reaper 2-1, be advised that target area includes multiple concealed positions with friendly forces in close proximity. Suggest coordinated attack with precision munitions. Copy Hog 17, I'm cleared hot with Hellfire missiles. Ghost felt her heart rate spike. Hellfire missiles were precision weapons, but they carried significant blast effects that could endanger friendly forces at 400 meters. The situation called for the surgical application of cannon fire, not explosive ordnance. Ghost watched through her targeting pod as Morrison's A-10 rolled into its attack run, Hellfire missiles mounted beneath the wings. The missiles were accurate and deadly, but their blast radius made them unsuitable for danger-close engagements unless absolutely necessary. Reaper 2-1, recommend you use gun instead of missiles. Friendlies are too close for explosive ordnance. Morrison's response was clipped and professional. Hog 17, I'm comfortable with my weapon selection. Maintain overwatch. Ghost bit back her initial response, recognizing that second-guessing another pilot's tactical decisions over an open radio frequency could undermine mission effectiveness. But she also knew that Morrison had never made a shot at this distance with friendlies in proximity. His experience was largely limited to pre-planned strikes against fixed targets with established safety margins. The first Hellfire missile streaked away from Morrison's aircraft, its contrail marking a perfect line toward the tree line. Ghost held her breath as she watched the weapon track toward impact, her mind automatically calculating blast effects and potential collateral damage. The explosion was massive, sending a column of smoke and debris high into the air. Through her targeting pod, Ghost could see trees falling and earth erupting in a perfect circle of destruction centered on the enemy position. But she could also see that the blast had occurred less than 300 meters from Lieutenant Kim's position, close enough to shower her soldiers with debris and potentially cause additional casualties. Good hit, good hit. Kim's voice came back over the radio, but Ghost could hear something else underneath the excitement. Pain, confusion, the sound of someone who had been too close to a large explosion. Morrison was already setting up for his second shot, apparently satisfied with the results of his first missile. But Ghost could see through her optics that the enemy fire had not stopped. If anything, it seemed to have intensified as insurgent fighters moved to new positions along the tree line. Cobra 6, this is Hog 17. What's your status after that explosion? Kim's response was delayed, and when it came, her voice was strained. Hog 17, we've got additional wounded from debris, still taking heavy fire from the tree line. Can you see the muzzle flashes? Ghost could indeed see the muzzle flashes, scattered along a 600-meter section of trees that would require multiple precision shots to neutralize effectively. Morrison's missile had eliminated one position, but the enemy had simply dispersed to alternate firing points. Reaper 2-1, this is Hog 17. Enemy has repositioned after your first shot. Recommend multiple gun runs to clear the tree line. Negative, Hog 17. I'm going to continue with missiles. Ghost felt frustration building in her chest. Morrison was following textbook procedures. Identify the target, select appropriate ordnance, engage from maximum standoff distance to minimize aircraft exposure. But textbook procedures didn't account for the fluid reality of close combat, where enemy positions shifted constantly and friendly forces needed immediate, precise fire support. She keyed her radio to contact the ground unit directly. Cobra 6, this is Hog 17. Can you give me a better description of enemy positions along the tree line? Hog 17, they're spread out along the entire northern edge. I can see at least 6 separate firing positions, maybe more. 6 positions meant 6 separate gun runs, each one requiring the kind of precision flying that Morrison had never attempted under combat conditions. Ghost looked at her fuel gauge and ammunition counter, calculating how long she could maintain station over the target area. The mathematics of close air support were unforgiving. Time, distance, ammunition, and fuel formed a complex equation that determined whether ground forces lived or died. Morrison's second Hellfire missile impacted 200 meters further east along the tree line, producing another spectacular explosion that temporarily silenced the enemy fire. But Ghost could see through her targeting pod that the insurgents were already moving to new positions, using the network of irrigation ditches and farm buildings to mask their movement. Cobra 6 Sitrep, Ghost called over the radio. Kim's response came back weak and strained. Hog 17, we've got 7 wounded now, 3 critical. The blast effects from those missiles are causing us problems. Can you switch to gun runs? Ghost felt her jaw clench. Morrison's missile strikes were technically accurate, but they were creating as many problems as they solved. The explosions were large enough to affect friendly forces while not precise enough to eliminate the dispersed enemy positions. She keyed her radio to Morrison's frequency. Reaper 2-1, ground forces are requesting.